Welcome to a special presentation of 6 News. For the next hour, we'll examine and review voter information with Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, Attorney General Dana Nessel, and your host, Sherry Jones. This is Making It Count.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Sherry Jones, and this is Making It Count, a voter information town hall. Thanks to the Michigan Association of Broadcasters, this program is running on stations across the state. So from Marquette to Detroit, we'd like to welcome all of you watching us on air and online. We're going to spend the next hour answering your questions about voting and the 2020 election. We are joined tonight by Michigan's top election official. Jocelyn Benson is our 43rd Secretary of State. She is a graduate of Harvard Law School and an expert on election law. She literally wrote the book on the subject. She's the author of State Secretaries of State, Guardians of the Democratic Process. It's a book about how the people in her job enforce election and campaign finance laws. Secretary Benson, thank you so much for joining us. We are also joined tonight by Dana Nessel. Dana Nessel is Michigan's 54th Attorney General. She is a University of Michigan graduate and Wayne State Law School graduate. As Attorney General, she is the state's Chief Law Enforcement Officer. So her office covers a wide variety of issues, but for tonight, we're going to talk with her about the legal issues surrounding voting and elections. Attorney General Nessel, thank you for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So both of our guests tonight are Democrats, and while we will talk about COVID, guns, and political observers as it relates to our polling places, this is going to be a nonpartisan hour. So we are not talking about the pros and cons of Donald Trump, Joe Biden, or any other candidate. We are here tonight to talk about you, Michiganders, and how you can make your vote count. So we're going to start with the basics. Secretary Benson, how can someone really know if they're registered to vote, and what should they do if they're not registered but they still want to vote?
Important question. If someone wants to confirm their registration, you can go to michigan.gov/vote. That's your one-stop shop for all voting needs and information. And on that website, you can confirm your registration. And if you're not registered to vote at this point, you can go to your township or city clerk's office with a residency verification and register to vote right then and there up until 8 p.m. on election day. Importantly, if you do register to vote at your township or city clerk's office, you can also get your ballot at that same time, fill it out, and return it all in one trip. So we really try to make it as easy as possible to securely register up to 8 p.m. on November 3rd, and also ensure if you do register in that way, you can still vote.
So it is kind of getting late to have a ballot mailed to you. Can Michiganders go and vote then in person on November 3rd? And any tips to avoid the long lines?
Well, importantly, we don't anticipate significant long lines. This is notably the 4th election we'll have this year, the 3rd in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. And notably because 2/3 of our citizens will likely vote absentee or prior to election day. You will see 1/3 of our citizens, probably about 2 million, vote in person on election day at your local precinct. That is an option and choice for every voter. But if you do choose that, we're confident that your health and safety will be protected and you don't have to anticipate long lines. You can go to michigan.gov/vote to find out your township or city clerk's office. If you'd like to vote early, you can pick up a ballot there or return it there. And you can also return a ballot at your local drop box. Also, you can find the location of that by entering your voter information at michigan.gov/vote.
And we're going to be talking about that too in a little more depth, so thank you. Attorney General Nessel, something caught my eye the other day as we were preparing for this town hall. I saw an article that said that several companies were offering incentives to their employees to vote. Let me give you an example. It said that Best Buy is staying closed until noon on election day so that workers can go and vote, and that Bank of America and Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, they're giving employees 3 paid hours off to vote. So what is your take on this?
Well, so a company can always incentivize voting in general in terms of, for instance, giving their employees time off. And, I applaud companies who do that to make it as easy as possible for people to be able to vote. But what companies can't do is you can't offer an employee something in exchange for supporting a particular candidate or a particular ballot proposal or anything else that's on the ballot. So generally speaking, of course, time off is great, and it's terrific to give people an opportunity to be able to engage in the democratic process, but you cannot offer anything to support a particular individual or candidate or proposal or anything of that nature.
All right, thank you. Secretary Benson, when you're voting absentee ahead of time or in person on Election Day, there are definitely some things that you ought to do, but there are some things that you should avoid. We want to talk about that. We're going to put some of those up on the screen for our viewers to see, but go ahead and elaborate on some of the do's and don'ts that you see right here. What should people keep in mind if they are voting absentee?
Well, this is such important information, especially because millions of citizens will be voting absentee for the first time ever. We want you to know you put your ballot in the envelope and then you sign the envelope with your signature. That's critical because that's how we verify your identity. Township and city clerks will, upon receiving your ballot, check to confirm that the signature on the ballot envelope in which the ballot is placed matches the signature they have on file for you. And if it doesn't match or if a signature is missing, you will hear from your township or city clerk in that regard. But best to avoid that and ensure, especially at this moment, that you sign that envelope and then drop it off either at your city or township clerk's office or at your local drop box. And you can again get the location of both of those at michigan.gov/vote. We don't want you to mail it in at this point because we're 6 days out of an election and ballots must be received by 8 p.m. on Tuesday. And there's no reason for you to risk utilizing the mail to return your ballot. Use a local drop box or return it at your township or city clerk's office. And as long as it's there by 8 p.m. on Election Day, it will count.
Now, when it comes to voting in person, we have a few more do's and don'ts. We're going to take a look at those.
Fantastic. Yes, always do your homework. I'm a former teacher and the daughter of 2 teachers, so homework is critical. Always support that. You do, if you have an ID, we recommend that. However, if you don't have an ID, you can still vote if you sign an affidavit affirming your identity. And again, that signature is what will be used to confirm your identity. We also do want you to wear a mask. I mean, look, if you vote in person on Election Day, you can expect to see poll workers wearing masks that we have provided, as well as gloves and sneeze guards, and they'll have hand sanitizer and other products on hand to protect everyone's health and safety. And we're asking you to do your part. Be sure to wear a mask. If you don't have one or show up without one, there will likely be masks at the precinct for you to borrow or wear as well. And it's really just our way of making sure that everyone's health and safety is protected in that moment you're in the precinct. Polling booths will be socially distant as well. And we've also been clear that you cannot wear campaign buttons or other types of political materials in the precinct because that is a sanctuary for voting. It's nonpartisan, and within a precinct or within 100 feet of a precinct, it's long established guidance that you can't wear any political material, bring any political material.
All right, well, thank you for helping us with those do's and don'ts. So when we come back, more on the many people voting absentee in this election and what you need to know to make your vote count. We'll be right back. Welcome back. A poll conducted by our station shows slightly more than half of the Michiganders who plan to vote say they'll do it absentee. And with less than a week before the election, we've already seen some very robust numbers. The state of Michigan has just over 8 million registered voters. And according to the numbers the Secretary of State's office just released yesterday, 3.1 million of them have already requested ballots, and 2.1 million Michiganders have already voted. That being said, for those of you who haven't asked for a ballot yet and who don't want to go to the polling place on Tuesday, can they still request a ballot? And if so, how? And is it too late to do that? Secretary Benson, I imagine it's getting late to actually have them mailed out. So how do they get their ballot?
Yeah, it is late to use the mail, but the hallmark of this year has been about choices for voters. We want citizens to know you have options to vote this year, even now, 6 days prior to the election. And so what your option is now is you can vote in person at your local precinct on Election Day, or you can vote prior to by going to your township or city clerk's office, filling out a form, picking up a ballot right then and there, and you can even complete it and return it all in one trip, or take it with you, vote from home, and then return it by Election Day day at your local drop box or your township or city clerk's office. So there's still plenty of time to do that. We just know the mail is so unpredictable right now for many reasons, and there's really no reason for you to depend on the mail unless you have to in this circumstance. So the drop box in your community, or local or city or township clerk, is really your portal for getting and returning your ballot at this point. And then you always have that fail-safe of your precinct on election day.
All right, and we do have a couple of questions about people who want to reconsider their vote. So Linda turned in her absentee ballot and would like to change her vote. Can she do that? And if so, what does she need to do?
She sure can. Now, notably in Michigan, we don't begin tabulating ballots until Tuesday, and that means up until Monday, you can go to your township or city clerk's office and fill out a form and essentially request that your original vote be spoiled or thrown out. And the clerk will do that at your direction and give you a new ballot that you can then complete just as you did the first one. Put it in an envelope, sign the envelope, hand it back in, and you have until 4 o'clock on Monday to do that, at which point after that your ballot and your choice is locked in.
And Cindy asked another question in that same vein. What do you do if you received an absentee ballot, but then you decided, you know what, I want to vote in person?
Well, you can bring that absentee ballot to your local precinct on election day, surrender it, and get an in-person precinct ballot to vote right then and there. So we are doing everything we can to be that adaptable, to give you those choices and to allow voters to choose to change their mind about either their ballot choices or their action and how they vote up until election day. Now, every day, can affect those choices in terms of what's still available. And you can always go to michigan.gov/vote if you have any questions, or contact your township or city clerk.
Our next question has to do with concerns about the ballot. So someone from the Grand Rapids area is asking, what would happen if they forgot to put their vote inside that yellow security envelope? But we're going to broaden this question out just a little bit more. If there's any kind of problem with an absentee ballot, will someone let them know? And will that voter have the opportunity to cast another ballot?
Yes. Now, first, we have been tracking the number of reasons why a ballot might be rejected. And the good news is the data is showing of the absentee ballots submitted, very few have been rejected for problems. It's primarily sometimes if a ballot is sent in, and this is the most important thing, the thing that's required, you put your ballot in the envelope and then you sign the outside of it. That signature is what we use to confirm, validate your ballot and verify your identity. So if that signature is missing or it doesn't match the signature we have on file, we can't validate your identity. Now, clerks are required to contact the voter in that scenario, and you can also confirm your ballot's acceptance or not at michigan.gov/vote, where you can track your ballot. But your township or city clerk will reach out to you by the means that they have to contact you if there is an error like a signature mismatch or a missing signature. However, and this is important to note, if the township or city clerk doesn't have your phone number and doesn't have an email for you, and in many cases all they have is an address for a voter, they would send you a notification. And of course, we're so close to an election, I don't want to depend on the mail. So that's why I'm asking and encouraging citizens who voted absentee, use our ballot tracking system at michigan.gov/vote. You'll see there whether your ballot was accepted or not, and if there is an alert that your ballot wasn't accepted, proactively reach out to your township and city clerk and find out what you have to do to make things right.
Okay, so you're an absentee voter, you've made your decisions, you've sent in your ballot, or you've dropped it off in the drop box, but we all know it's just not the same as sliding it in the ballot box on election day. So how do we track, Patty wants to know, and many others, how do we track that our ballots have been counted? And you've talked a lot about the website. Maybe you can share a little bit more about that.
I mean, your township and city clerk really are your portal for getting those questions directly answered, particularly if there's a unique situation. But the statewide tracking system at michigan.gov/vote helps you ensure your ballot was received. And then if you have any further questions, if you follow up with your township and city clerk, they can give you any additional assurances and actually even double check for you if they have time. Now, they're all very busy because we've got more people voting and more people voting absentee than ever before, so be patient as well. If you can't get through to them on the first try, know that we're all working hard to make every vote count, but truly continue to be vigilant until you get the confirmation that you need to ensure your vote's been received and will count.
And I want you to know that we do have a link to that page on our website at WLNS.com, as well as many other important election issues and sites there. Go to WLNS.com to find that, so thank you. So when we come back, we're going to talk about the people who plan to go to the polls on Election Day. And we'll tell you what you need to know if you're voting in person, when Make It Count continues. Before the break, we spent a lot of time on the half of the population voting absentee. So now we're going to spend some time on the other half, the people that will go to the polls on Tuesday. And Secretary Benson, you know, we talked about doing your homework a little bit earlier. There's a way for people to see what their ballot actually entails before they go to the polls. And that will help cut down on the lines, I'm sure. So tell us more about that.
Well, a couple of things. One, you can go to michigan.gov and get a sample ballot by entering your voter information, and also find out your location of your precinct that you can go to on Election Day and cast your ballot. So preparation ahead of time is really important, and doing research, being an informed voter is critical. And we try to provide all the resources we can for you in that regard. And several other organizations like the League of Women Voters at vote411.org and others provide that information as well. So we encourage you to read up ahead of time, but also know that because we anticipate 2/3 of our citizens will be voting absentee, you'll hopefully have a lot of space and time at the precincts as well to take your time and enjoy that experience if indeed you choose to vote in person.
And we also talked about that you need to bring an ID, but what if you wait in line for a long time and then you get to the front and then you find out you don't have your ID? What happens then?
Fear not, you can still vote. You simply just sign an affidavit, and that signature is then used to identify you. And notably, I've always seen the research shows that signatures are sometimes an even more effective way at confirming someone's identity, because it's much more difficult to forge someone's signature than it is to even come up with a fake ID. So that signature affidavit is a really crucial piece, and ensures that no one is turned away because they forget an ID or don't have one, that they can still vote simply, again, by signing that affidavit confirming their identity.
All right, now we have an important legal question about voting, and I know you're both lawyers, but we're going to defer to the Attorney General on this one. So, can I take a ballot selfie? Big question. And what exactly are the rules of what can you take and what you cannot take pictures of on Election Day?
Well, you can take a picture of your own ballot, but you cannot take a picture of anybody else's ballot. So when you are inside the polling area, it's very important that you not capture anyone else's ballot but your own. Obviously, we have privacy laws when it comes to each and every person's vote. No one is allowed to know how another person has voted, but if you want to make it clear how you voted, you're allowed to take a picture of your own ballot.
Perfect. Well, still ahead, we're going to tackle election safety and security, and we're going to have some answers to some of your biggest questions. So stay tuned. Making It Count. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The 2020 presidential election is going to be remembered for many reasons. Part of it is the polarized electorate and the nature of the races, but like everything else in 2020, safety is also on everyone's mind. Secretary Benson, we're going to start with you on this question, and we're going to talk about the COVID crisis. So, from waiting in line to casting a ballot, what steps are being taken to make sure that people are protected when they go to the polls on November 3rd?
We've really prioritized the health and safety of our voters since the pandemic hit, which notably was the night of our March presidential primary back on March 10th, when we got our first case soon after the polls closed. And so, noting that, we've had 2 elections since then, one in May and one in August, where we've been able to both educate voters about their choices to vote from home and how to do so in preparation in part for this grand finale of an election this November, but also prepare our poll workers to have social distancing and health protocols in place to protect the health and safety of every voter. So we've now demonstrably created polling places as sanctuaries for the health and safety for our voters. We've provided PPE for every election worker. We've recruited over 30,000 new election workers to ensure that no one who's immune compromised or otherwise uncomfortable working as a poll worker on Election Day has to do so. So we'll be ready to ensure our precincts are fully staffed, fully in compliance with the CDC social distancing guidelines. We ask voters, as well as mentioned before, to wear a mask to protect the health and safety of others, as our poll workers protect everyone's health and safety as well. And you know, the bottom line for me to remember is that voting should be a celebration. This is one of the best things we get to do collectively as citizens in our democracy, and regardless of who you vote for or what side of an issue you may be on or what candidate you support, we should all be supportive of every vote counting and ensuring every voice is heard. And it's been a great joy to see so many people participating this year in reflection of that and in reflection of their commitment to democracy and to our elections.
We're going to talk now about the safety of the ballots themselves. A lot of people who vote absentee, of course, are dropping their ballots off in drop boxes, but there are some concerns about the safety of those specific boxes, especially here in Lansing. Now, over the weekend, someone set fire inside a drop box in the Boston area and destroyed about a couple dozen ballots. So please ensure that these boxes are safe, and what kind of penalties are we looking at if we find out that someone does tamper with them?
Well, I'm going to turn to our state's chief law enforcement officer to talk about the penalties and those issues, but I'll emphasize that in installing over 1,000 drop boxes all across the state, we've worked with our city and township clerks to ensure they're in secure, well-lit areas, that there's video surveillance on them and other protocols in place to protect the security of the ballots and the drop boxes. And so it's important for us to be proactive in that regard. And also, ballots are emptied every day by bipartisan poll workers, so no ballots are left overnight, to also minimize or mitigate the potential for any problems to occur. And then, of course, we've got our dynamite attorney general on the case, protecting the ballots and protecting those boxes.
Yeah, and we have very, very strong laws in place that are both state laws and federal laws that involve the destruction of ballots. So in the event that anyone were to do anything like that, honestly, they'd be facing some very stiff penalties here in the state of Michigan and also under federal law. And our department has been incredibly aggressive about pursuing cases whenever we see any sort of efforts even to tamper. But I will say this, there are so many great protocols in place that if there are any issues at all, the secretary catches those, and then people are given another opportunity to vote in the event.
And we are back with Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel and Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. Thank you again for joining us tonight. You know, we talk a little bit about the ballots themselves, but Michiganders are allowed to vote a straight party ticket. But here's a question that we have from a viewer in West Michigan. She says, what happens if you vote straight party and then you vote for the individual candidates? Will your vote not count, or could your ballot be voided? Secretary Benson, what is your take on this?
It will count. You're completely permitted to simply vote a straight party ticket, but you can then override that through counting individual races. And the most important thing to pay attention to is in each individual race category, what it says, vote for no more than one or vote for no more than two. That's your instruction on how many candidates you can choose. And what the straight party designation does is, in the instance in which you leave something blank, it will count your vote for the candidate affiliated with whatever party you choose at the top. But you can, again, always override that by going down through the individual categories as well.
Of course, there's more to this year's election, we know, than the presidential race or Michigan's U.S. Senate seat. And if you only vote straight party, you will leave a lot of unanswered questions on your ballot. So, Secretary Benson, if you would, talk about flipping that ballot over and what's at stake in the nonpartisan section of that ballot.
Yes, of course. Some races get more attention than others, but it's important to make sure your vote counts in every race you want to participate in. So always read the entire ballot, flip it, and look through the categories. Many judicial races, including the Michigan Supreme Court judicial races, on the ballot. There are proposals on the ballot. There's a lot of ways in which you as a voter are asked to weigh in on important decisions and lawmakers in the state. So do complete your ballot, do flip your ballot, and ensure you complete it in every category you wish to participate. And if you do vote from home or vote early, one of the advantages of is you can take your time, sit at your kitchen table and do your own research into different judicial candidates, for example, or different proposals. And that's one of the things I think we'll see more of this year, voters having the ability to take more time to ensure they completely fill out their ballot and do so from the position of having access to information and researching the candidates and options.
That's right. That comes in that do your homework part, right? Thank you. So one of the the things that haven't really gotten a lot of attention this year are the statewide proposals, and one of them deals with the government's right to search your phone and other electronic devices. So Attorney General Nessel, as the state's top law enforcement official, it seems like this is something that you would be willing to comment on.
Yeah, sure. Well, you know, when the Fourth Amendment, which involves when law enforcement can search your papers, effects, or other things, came into being, obviously we couldn't have ever foreseen that we would have smartphones. But obviously, you know, that is the place where most people keep their personal information. And so the question involves whether or not law enforcement would have to obtain a search warrant to go into your phone in order to access that data.
All right, so that is Prop 2. So we have about 15 minutes left of our town hall, and still ahead we have some answers for people in certain groups who may have some extra challenges at the ballot box. The answers when Making It Count continues, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We wanted to take a few minutes to talk about specific groups of people and their ability to vote. And we're going to start with a question from Heather Dow, who wants to know what steps are being taken to make sure that people with disabilities will be able to vote at the polls on Election Day. Secretary Benson, let's start with you.
Well, every precinct has a voter access terminal that any voter can use, but it's particularly available for our voters who need critical access to the ballot, either hard of hearing or deaf or deafblind voters. And so those voter assist terminals are accessible terminals and have been widely used in communities all throughout our state for a number of years. And we're working with the disability community to make improvements there, but for this election, know that they'll be there, and hopefully we'll be able to improve upon them even more in future years. And importantly also, we equipped our poll workers with sneeze guards, so in the case where a voter needs to read lips in order to understand, they can take a mask off and speak through the sneeze guard. And voters also have a federal right to bring someone with them if they need assistance at the polls on Election Day as well. And so we really want to make sure that every voice is heard and that everyone has free and unfettered access to casting their right to vote in person on Election Day.
And Secretary Benson, we know that the military is near and dear to your heart. You founded and headed up a group that's called Military Spouses of Michigan. And so as you know, many members of the military, of course, serve across the nation and around the world. So what's being done to make sure that all their votes are counted?
Well, a number of things, and certainly we've worked with the legislature to get legislation passed to actually allow the electronic and efficient return of ballots for our service members and their partners or spouses serving overseas. Notably, that legislation is still it's been passed but has not reached the governor yet, so we're waiting for action there. And in the interim, we've worked to ensure that our overseas voters and our military service members have access to the federal ballot as well as ballots to be emailed to them ahead of time, and we're tracking the return of those ballots. It's been a challenge with the coronavirus pandemic, and international postal service has not been easy, but we've been working diligently directly with many military voters who've reached out to us through their township or city clerks to solve problems as we go, because again, it is a priority for us that we ensure their votes are counted, and we hope the legislature will join us in ensuring we update our laws to ease that process in future elections.
And you know, we're here in Lansing, we're right next to Michigan State University, and of course we're not the only town in Michigan that is host to a college or a university. So while COVID is keeping some students at home, others have moved into their dorms and their apartments. So where should those students vote? We have a couple of questions here. Should they vote absentee from their home address? Should they vote in their college town using their current address? And what's the rule about voting using the address on your driver's license?
Well, I mean, you can vote wherever you're registered to vote, whether that's at school or at home. And if you want to switch your registration, because let's say you are not on campus because instead you're learning remotely, then you can go into your clerk's office and you can re-register, and then you can simply vote from home. But the important thing to remember is if you're on campus and you've been quarantined by your university, you can still leave in order to vote. And whether that's on Election Day or whether you want to vote earlier than that, you have a fundamental right to vote, and you can still leave your dorm room or your apartment in order to go do that.
And I think that answers a lot of questions that we had come in. Thank you both for that. Well, the questions don't end when the polls close. And we're going to answer your questions about counting and recounting the results. And that's when Make It Count continues. Welcome back. In the few minutes that we have left with the Attorney General and Secretary of State, we want to talk about what's going to happen after the election. And the one thing that almost everyone wants to know is how long is it going to take to count the ballots? And Secretary Benson, when do you think that we'll be able to get Michigan's results?
Well, notably, it will be rolling. We'll certainly be having jurisdictions report out their vote tallies, their unofficial results as they come in. But the important thing to remember is that 2/3 of our voters are voting absentee. And those ballots all get counted centrally beginning at 7 a.m. on Election Day. And if you've got over 3 million ballots that are going to be tabulated centrally beginning on Election Day, we've done the math based on the number of machines, jurisdictions, and election workers. It takes 80 hours to do that many ballots. And that takes us to Friday. Now, we've increased efficiencies and we've worked with particular jurisdictions to help ensure they have double and sometimes triple the number of machines that they may need to increase capacity as much as possible. So we may get results in sooner. The bottom line is from the minute the polls close to the minute we have that full unofficial tabulation, we'll be transparently updating the public about our processes and what's happening so that everyone knows that the count continues and that candidates know that until the final ballot is tabulated, no one can feasibly declare victory because every vote counts, and that is what determines the outcome of the election.
That's right, and even after the votes are counted, that doesn't mean the election is over, as you said. So we have a question from a viewer about recounts. So what is the margin of error that would necessitate a recount? Who would do that, and how long would it take?
Well, the margin depends based on the particular race, but the bottom line is there's automatic recounts and then there can be candidate requested recounts, and it all determines, it's all most determined by the closeness of the race. So with that in mind, we want everyone to vote and get as many, all the valid votes in prior to 8 p.m. on Election Day. We've been working to train our poll workers with increased security protocols to ensure they secure the ballots should there be a recount. And we'll be continually updating the public from the moment those polls close until we work through the tabulation process. Importantly, it takes 2 weeks to go to the official tabulation, which is oftentimes when recounts and other things can come to fruition. So yes, this certainly will be an ongoing issue, particularly if there's close races at various levels, and we'll continue to keep the public informed along the way of what they can expect in terms of results.
All right, thank you very much, and our special thanks to Attorney General Dana Nessel and of course our Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson for joining us tonight. On behalf of the Michigan Association of Broadcasters, we'd like to thank all of the stations who carried this town hall on air and online tonight. And we'd like to thank the many people who sent in questions for our town hall. And we want to thank you for watching. I'm Sherry Jones, and remember to make your vote count. Good night.